Welcome back, weirdos and weeaboos, to the channel Double Doge, where today I'm going to be talking about some concepts that I've had in mind for a complete Fright Rider rework. Now, if you missed it, I recently did a video on Fright Rider, which is technically like a part 1 to this, but if you already know how Fright Rider works, then you don't necessarily need to watch that video to follow this one, though I'd recommend it. Either way, sit back, relax, and either watch the gameplay or, I don't know, boot up a game of your own and just play this in the background while I tell you about how I would like to rework Fright Rider. But just before we do jump into it, I just want to clarify that when I say this is a rework for Fright Rider, I obviously know that this rework ever being implemented is basically never happening. Not only because the Skylanders games don't get updates, not only because Skylanders as a series is dead, but also because even if it does have a revival, which isn't all too out there in the next few years, if it does have a revival, I doubt that Fright Rider would be one of the first characters that would put lots of effort into reworking and having a much more fleshed out kit, if they even bother reworking any movesets, which is already pretty out there. All that to say, this is not made as a, wow, this is so realistic. Tomorrow, Toys for Bob is going to take my advice and make this the new Fright Rider. And of course, I've talked many times before about how I really would love to see a version of Skylanders that takes the same basic core gameplay, but really ups the skill expression, the pace of the gameplay, and of course, the depth of the movesets of each character. For that reason, it is very much on purpose that this moveset idea is more in-depth than any normal Skylander would be, and as a result, would probably feel a little bit out of place if it was just thrown into the game as it is right now. I'm going to fully acknowledge that, and just say, but would you agree that this sounds very fun though? And hopefully, by the end of this video, the answer will be yes. Because I have quite a lot of changes planned, ranging from changes to his base stats, changes to his upgrades, changes to add more combo inputs to the character, and even an idea for a sort of pseudo-ultimate ability you have to work up to that you can use on the character. Either way, I'm just doing a little bit of preamble both to establish this context and also lead you in with just a little taste of what's to come, because to start with, we have to start somewhere. And unfortunately, a lot of the more exciting stuff has to connect to the more boring stuff. So first up on the reworking chopping block is his melee abilities, which clearly leave a lot to be desired on the base character. It's like I said in the last video, it feels like the developers can't pick if they want Fright Rider to be a rushdown character or a swordy, and he ends up getting the worst of both worlds, having the slow attack speed and damage of a swordy, but having the reach of a rushdown character that has to get in people's faces to do anything. The solution here is quite simple. Pick a lane. Are you a swordy or are you a rushdown character? One or the other. And the obvious answer might seem to be, well, it's Fright Rider. He's got a big spear, that's basically a sword. He should be a swordy. He should space people out, right? Well, I think that's the obvious answer, and I don't think it's wrong to choose that. However, you're going to see more as we progress, but I think in the context of this new kit I've given for Fright Rider, I think it might be more entertaining to lean the other direction, and have his melee something that is still pretty low in damage and still pretty short range, but is much, much quicker to attack. Essentially, as it is right now, the two standard melees you do with Fright Rider before you get your combo input are a headbutt from Ozzy, followed up by a spear slash from Fright Rider. I'd like to change this to just be 2 rapid bites from Ozzy. But when I say these things should be quick, I really do mean very snappy. I mean that before, if you wanted to do your 3-hit combo, it was like hit, hit, hit. Whereas with this bite, it would be a lot more like hit, hit, hit. Again, I wouldn't increase the damage much and I would keep the range very short, so that doesn't mean that this would be insane DPS, but it does mean it would be very, very quick to act. Generally speaking, I feel like this is an interesting direction to go for the character because this rework already makes him a lot slipperier and a lot more the kind of character who catches people when they're vulnerable whenever the window presents itself. And so it feels more fitting to give him a quick to act but dangerous melee rather than a safer melee that's a bit more average in the stats. It will also have the added benefit of making all 3 of his combo attacks a whole lot more viable to use, considering now the 2 attacks that you're forced to do to activate a combo attack can come much, much faster and provide way less delay. Especially since, as I mentioned, one of the clunkiest parts about Fright Rider's kit is that often, if you're taking the melee path, you want to be spamming your combos a lot. They're some of your best moves, but your actual melee sucks. So a lot of the time, you're just headbutting the air just to wind up for your combo attack, which not only is weird in the first place, but especially feels bad when the headbutt and the spear slash are so slow. Next up is Burrow, which, like a lot of things in this rework, is mostly going to receive changes in the form of new upgrades rather than new things in his base kit. But the one thing that I want to ensure is definitely there in the base kit is that I think that Burrow should just go way, way faster. I actually don't mind keeping the startup lag and end lag. In fact, I might even increase it to make the move more punishable to compensate, but I do think that you should be able to move really fast while underground, so it actually feels like an advantage to be underground, rather than practically the same as just walking, but I guess you get some iframes. Generally throughout this rework, I'm not going to be too hung up on specific numbers, but I occasionally will throw out some figures just to give you an idea. I genuinely think that he should probably move about 3 times faster than he currently does while he's underground. This would not only just simply be fun to use, but more importantly, it would allow you to use Burrow creatively in far more situations as just a way to be slippery or reposition smartly. But for as much as most of the changes to the base kit aren't the spiciest, this is probably the most interesting part. I would like to give Fright Rider mid-air attacks. And I say attacks because I'm not talking about 1 new attack, or even 2. I'm talking about 3 brand new attacks, 1 for each ability button. First up, Ground Pound. Pretty self-explanatory. If you attempt to hit your melee button while you are airborne, you will perform a Ground Pound. It'd be a bit slower than most of his other attacks, but obviously higher in the damage, and of course it would be an AoE, so you could use it to clear out enemies surrounding you. Specifically, the way I envision this working is that when you hit your Ground Pound, you literally freeze in midair and hover for a moment as Fright Rider points his spear towards the ground, and then once it's pointing towards the ground, he shoots down extremely quickly with a big slam and a dust cloud that sort of visualizes where the AoE is. The other 2 attacks, in fairness, are a bit smaller, but they'll have their use cases. Attempting to press charge in midair, if there's no enemies nearby, will just do a normal charge, just one that begins in midair. However, if there is a nearby enemy and you press charge while you are in the air, then Fright Rider will immediately lock on to this nearby enemy and lunge at them midair with his spear. This is essentially just a single spear slash that deals moderate damage, and it's not the fastest attacking move, but the main use of it is the fact that it's an airborne move you can use that can lock on to targets that are flying through the air and quite difficult to hit. So again, this rework is assuming we keep the new mechanics added in Swap Force, where you can jump and you can launch enemies into the air and have increased crit chance against enemies you hit while in midair. I think that's a really cool mechanic in Swap Force, and while it gets plenty of use, specifically the ability to deal bonus damage to enemies in midair is a little bit niche for most characters in Swap Force, just because it is actually quite difficult to land hits on characters midair when most Skylanders don't have midair attacks, and most of their attacks are not designed with the problem in mind of what if the enemy is flying through the sky. Fright Rider is included in that list, however, this rework aims to give him more to do with being in the air or attacking enemies that are flying through the air after being launched. As a result, it only makes sense to give him a little attack that maybe isn't the flashiest, but can just be used in situations where you just need to try and hit an enemy that's flying through the air, and it's really difficult and annoying. Having an ability that just locks onto them for you and lunges you at them will make that a lot better, and allow you to combo and follow up from other moves that we'll be talking about later. Lastly is the mid-air Burrow. What this will do is it technically will put you underground like Burrow does, but in a different fashion. When you hit Burrow while you're mid-air, Fright Rider will fast fall as fast as he can to the ground and bury himself under there. Not just the head, the entire body of Fright Rider and Ozzy will go underground, and there will just be a mound of dirt where they used to be. This will of course give them complete invincibility frames. Once you let go, you'll pop out. But here's the thing. First of all, there is no hitbox on entering or leaving the ground on this version of Burrow. So as a result, you can't use it as an attack. As well as that, you can't even move while using this version of Burrow. This is essentially just used as a sort of dodge in place, for lack of a better word. This is supposed to be useful for situations where you start coming at an enemy and you suddenly realize, oh wait, no, I don't want to be here. And if you react quick enough, you can jump, hit Burrow, and get into the earth as fast as possible. And of course, if you use your normal Burrow, that would leave Ozzy's body still standing behind and still able to be hit. But with this version of Burrow, the whole body goes underground and you are completely invincible. Again, though, unfortunately, that does mean it wouldn't be fair to allow this attack to damage enemies or be used to move around, considering it's basically unpunishable. It's really, really quick, and as soon as it activates, you are literally invincible. So it is basically just a way to dodge incoming hits. That being said, it will get a small boost in the form of an upgrade that you'll see later in this video. So, as a quick recap, that means your 3 new abilities by using the 3 different attacks in midair are a ground pound, a lock-on slash with your spear at an aerial enemy if they're nearby, or this hiding underground ability where you do this quick mid-air burrow. Even though some of them might be interesting and change the gameplay a little, none of them are all that flashy or powerful, but that's because they're all from the base kit. So let's start getting into some slightly more interesting changes now, shall we? Now, believe it or not, I actually have a few changes proposed for even just the basic upgrades before you get to your first upgrade paths. First of all, can I just point out, if you weren't aware, Fright Rider has 3 upgrades that do nothing but increase your melee damage. 3 of them. You only get 11 upgrades on a Skylander. That means that more than a quarter of Fright Rider's entire upgrade tree is just damage buffs to melee. That's really boring, and it's not like his melee does that much damage even when it's fully upgraded anyway. So, I say we get rid of both the first 2 melee damage upgrades on the initial path before you pick an upgrade path, and we replace them both with new abilities. The first melee damage upgrade will be replaced with Watch Your Behind, an upgrade which makes you deal bonus damage to enemies when they are hit mid-air or while they're facing away from you. This upgrade is being introduced since, first of all, already in Swap Force onwards, Fright Rider has a lot of attacks he can use to put enemies in the air, and he's going to get even more in this rework. This is almost Fright Rider's kind of identity here, is launching enemies into the air and juggling them. So obviously it's worthwhile to further incentivize that with this upgrade, and it's also got the bonus, as I say, of dealing bonus damage to enemies from behind, because of the fact that, well, first of all, that's going to be a good use of Burrow to sneak behind enemies and then get a quick hit from the back, but also because big, heavy enemies cannot be launched into the air. And of course, for them, you're still going to need certain ways to be able to deal with them. You can't have a character that does nothing but juggle airborne enemies when there are some enemies you just can't knock into the air. So being able to hit these enemies from the back at least gives you something to mess around with. As for the second melee damage upgrade, this isn't necessarily directly getting replaced with a new ability, more so I'm moving the Soul Gem to this slot, which again, as a reminder, his Soul Gem upgrade is the one where you can drag enemies underground with you. I feel like that's such an important upgrade to making this character even playable and have their identity that it's weird that it's their Soul Gem and you get it so late. So I'm going to move that to the end of the basic upgrades, and instead I'm going to give them a new Soul Gem, which I'll tell you about later. Lastly, you might be wondering what's going to happen with the upgrade paths. Well, to be frank, Fright Rider does have a lot of pretty redundant upgrades that don't have to be spread out over multiple upgrade slots. So essentially I've decided to take both his melee path and his charge path and combine them into one upgrade path, all for spear-based attacks. Meanwhile, he's going to get a brand new upgrade path for burrow-based attacks, which are all completely original to this rework. But first things first, let's cover how I'm combining the upgrade paths. And although it's mostly the same, I do add a couple new things in there. For the first upgrade on the spear path, I'm just merging together the increased spear damage and the new charge attack you can get for your melee. Again, there's no reason these things have to be separate, so why not? That being said, things are already going to get a bit interesting because I'm completely reworking the charge attack. Now don't panic. I'm keeping the idea of the ostrich heads multiplying and shooting out of the ground rapidly because it is just visually sick. But as I say, in actual gameplay, it's painfully niche. So Fright Rider's charge attack is getting reworked into the brand new pole vault attack. Now, when you charge up a melee, once you release, Fright Rider will lunge forward with his spear with as much range as he can muster, and if it connects on a target, this is what's going to happen. The target is going to become stunned and frozen in place. Even if it was going to do enough damage to kill them, the initial hit, they will still be frozen in place and they won't actually die until the entire attack finishes. Fright Rider will then use the spear as a pole vault to launch himself into the air and pull the sphere out of the enemy. At which point, the enemy that was stunned can now die if they took enough damage, or they come back to being able to walk around and attack. While Fright Rider is mid-air, Aussie will bury their head underground and do the usual charge-up attack, where loads of little Aussie heads shoot up from the ground in a circle around where Fright Rider's about to slam down. And finally, yeah, you can probably see where this is going, Fright Rider slams down with his spear and lands back on the ground as Ozzy pops back up from underground and he gets back on him. So we kind of get to combine this big flashy leap attack with the already really cool ostrich head attack. It's obviously going to be really good for pure damage, it's going to be good for AoE, but it's also going to be good for getting behind enemies, because if the enemy you hit with this attack has a lot of health and doesn't die to it, even if the attack is laggy, by the time it ends, you're going to be standing behind the enemy, and if they're a big slow enemy, it's going to take them a while to turn around. And once again, that's yet more synergy with the ability to do extra damage to enemies from behind. Oh, speaking of which, all the Aussie heads popping out the ground will, of course, launch enemies into the air as well. The next upgrade is the usual increased charge speed and damage that we've already seen before, but now with a new ability tacked on, where you can perform a similar pole vault attack while charging by just hitting jump. So as I say, this is similar to the pole vault attack that I just described, but it's going to be a little bit weaker because you don't have to charge it up, but still going to be the same idea. Just in this case, instead of stabbing his spear into an enemy, Fright Rider will instead just stab his spear into the ground and just leap off the ground, but he'll still do the same slam attack, and while he's midair, the ostrich heads will still pop out of the ground, only instead of in a circle, they will shoot out in a sort of wave going in the direction you were charging. Lastly, for the final upgrade, we are going to combine every single combo input, so that means his AAB and AAC of course, but also the extra attacks you can do while charging by pressing melee or burrow while charging. They are all included in this one upgrade. However, there's a couple extras I need to add on to the end of this. For one, you might notice that I've already compared the pole vault upgrade to the sort of leap attack you can do by pressing burrow by charging already. And of course, it kind of just seems like a cooler version of that attack now. So I would replace the leap attack while charging with instead a sort of underground dash. This is less so an attack now, I guess, but essentially it would have you very quickly burrow underground and dash forward a bit, even faster than your dash already normally goes, only without a hitbox, but of course, while you're underground, you're invincible. So you could use this to go even faster than you would go normally just by holding charge, or you can use this to go right under things that would usually kill you for getting close, but you wouldn't really be able to use it as an attack. Lastly, just some small little details. I want to provide a couple buffs to some of the combo inputs. I think the AAB is probably fine as it is. I don't know, maybe it would need to be a little bit faster just with power creep and all that, but generally I think it's in a good spot. So I would just make his AAC a little bit faster. It is already pretty fast, but it feels like the only thing it has going for it is that it's the fastest combo attack, so I'd want to exaggerate that a bit so it feels a bit more worthwhile. But the more interesting thing is I like the idea of making the AAA combo a move that you can steer and extend. So if you keep holding A on the final A hit, you can have the head go out further than usual, and while the head is reaching out to its target, you can steer it left and right, if of course you need to hit a target that's a little to the left or a little to the right of where you're facing. Essentially because, once again, it feels like AAB is the combo to use almost all the time by default, so these buffs should give the AAA combo a bit more room to be useful, because it's a bit faster than the AAB and it's a bit more controllable where the result is going to be with a bit more range, if you can wait it out a bit. With that said, if you already thought that was kind of spicy, that's the upgrade path that has all the old upgrades. What about the upgrade path that actually has brand new upgrades? So for the Burrow path, our first upgrade is under construction. This gives you a new ability where if you press jump while you're busy making a path with your burrow, it will cancel making the path and instead leave a hole where you left your head. This does mean that you can cancel burrow immediately when you need to, but that on its own obviously isn't very spicy. What's a bit more interesting is when you do the aerial burrow where you're usually not allowed to move, but you do get almost immediate invincibility, you can now choose to pop out from the hole that you created earlier rather than from the same place you already entered the ground from. So you can essentially almost teleport back to that location whenever you like. I specified the aerial burrow just because the grounded burrow is going to get a few combo inputs, which would make it quite awkward to figure out the controls to make it work with that. Either way, the next upgrade is as above, so below. This one's going to take a bit more explanation, so I decided to initially write it out how I'd imagine it be literally explained in game, because of course it can't be too wordy. Press jump while traveling underground to pop out from below early and shoot high into the sky. Perform a ground pound afterwards for a head-spinning surprise. So just to be clear, the last one is if you press jump before you finish creating your path with your burrow. This one is if you're already traveling underground, you've already let go of burrow, but you've not come out from underground yet. You can pop out early by forcing yourself to stay in place by holding jump, and then when you let go of jump, you'll pop out from below the ground. But of course, the interesting thing is the head-spinning surprise. If you try to perform a ground pound immediately after popping out of the ground this way, it will add an extra spear spin onto the wind-up of the attack, which causes Fright Rider to briefly hover in place while sucking all nearby enemies that are in the air, ensuring that they all get hit by the following ground pound. The idea is that if you didn't have this, it'd be a bit awkward because you could have such a nice and flashy looking ground pound, but you would have just knocked all the enemies out of where the ground pound is. But with this, you can not only knock enemies up into the air by popping out of the ground, but then suck them back in towards you so that when you ground pound, you actually hit all the enemies you just knocked up. But here comes the last and most elaborate upgrade. Underhanded tactics. While burrowing, you can now press melee to leave spines in the ground, or charge to place treats. Perform special attacks as you pass over them. So to explain further, first of all, there's going to be a limit. You can only have up to 3 spines or treats combined that may be left on the map at once. If you try to add another one when there's already 3 on the screen, the oldest one on the screen will just disappear. So essentially, when you let go of Burrow and you start tracing the path that you just left, once you start traveling underground, the second you make contact with spines or treats, it will activate some kind of special attack. For the spines, this will be that on contact, Fright Rider will briefly pop back out from underground and spin around on the spines, holding onto them, swinging his spear, before burrowing back underground and continuing along the path. This does briefly pause your movement and leave you vulnerable again while you're above ground, but of course you will become invincible again once you go back underground to continue tracing the path. For the treats, an Aussie head will briefly pop out to gobble up the tree and any enemies standing near it. Surviving enemies are launched into the air as usual, and once again this pauses your movement and makes you briefly vulnerable again before continuing along the underground path. However, this attack's animation is much quicker with smaller AoE and damage numbers, so while it doesn't do as much, not only can you still use it to put enemies in the air, but of course it's a bit safer, it's a bit harder to get hit while doing this move. So just to give a little bit more clarity on the dig path, of course I've just explained the upgrades, but that doesn't give you an idea of how they could be used in combination. Like for example, with underhanded tactics, because of the fact that you place these treats and spines while you're building your path, but you don't touch them until you let go and let it rip, you obviously got to be planning in advance and sort of setting up a bit of a mousetrap for the enemies to go through. And because of the way that works, you're likely going to be trying to set up situations where you can knock up enemies into the air using the treats, and then while they're still mid-air, pop back out of the ground again for a spin on one of those spines, where you do the spin attack on them while they're mid-air, and then immediately go back underground. And then maybe if you even wanted to continue following up, you could then, instead of tracing the rest of the underground path, cancel it by leaping out of the ground and doing one of those spin and then ground pounds to do an even more elaborate combo attack. As well as that, one thing you might not have immediately thought of, but you would eventually have to consider, is what happens if you cancel making a path you already put treats and spines on. Well, as I say, they don't disappear until you either use them or you try to place more than you're allowed to have on screen at once. So if you just left them there, what you could do is later trace a new path that reuses the treats and spines just left on the ground, but in a different order to the way that you originally intended to use them. So you can see how this could make eventually for a very elaborate, very, very interesting combo-heavy character, where you're constantly doing the best you can to either hide below enemies, get under their legs, sneak around the side, get behind them, or knock them up into the air and juggle them. And if all else fails, you try and trap them in this giant mousetrap of spines, treats, and holes. Obviously, most of this is in the dig path I've just explained, but even the normal spear path, while it's definitely closer to the traditional normal Fright Rider, still has a lot of combo potential in it, in that all the capabilities of the charge path are now merged with the capabilities of the melee path that already existed. And of course, the pole vault attacks are a lot more flashy than what you would have gotten in the past. Finally though, I did say that I wanted to give them a brand new soul gem. So let's cover that. You see, I wanted this to be something special, but I was a bit wary at first. Had I overdone it? Was this a little bit too beyond the pale? But I've given it some thought and I feel like this is perfectly on the line. Like if I push this even just a little further, it would get a bit too much. But I feel like where it is right now is just perfect. This soul gem is called Soul Stealer. And essentially, it grants 3 new abilities that are all combined into one mechanic. For one, when you kill enemies with your spear, you temporarily boost your crit rate. However, this boost does slowly dissipate if you go a long time without getting kills with your spear. On the other hand, killing enemies with Aussie directly temporarily will boost your speed, and this works the same, that it slowly dissipates over time. Now, you can boost these quite a bit, but there would eventually be a cap, where obviously you don't want to have infinite speed or crit rate. That would be very hard to balance around. So eventually it stops going up. And in-game, I just imagine seeing like a progressively strengthening glow on your spear and Aussie's head and eyes or whatever. But here comes the final part of this mechanic. If both Aussie and your spear are glowing with full power, if you can't get any more speed or crit, because you've maxed out both your kills on your spear and your kills with Aussie, and you can't get any more boost, then the next time you perform a ground pound, it will trigger an explosion of souls for huge AoE damage, which knocks enemies into the air and stuns them. This expends your charge, so you're reset back to having no crit boost and no speed afterwards, but of course it is an enormous, devastating attack that would obviously just nuke the battlefield. And for as strong as that may sound, keep in mind that you are severely debuffing your stats when you do this, and that you would have to get a lot of kills with both Aussie and your spear, and make sure that you get them at a fast pace to even be able to do this attack. I think this could make for a pretty interesting soul gem, not only for just general fact, it's kind of like an ultimate ability, which we don't really have much comparison to that in Skylanders right now, but also because I did think it was kind of an interesting idea, splitting up the kills that Fright Rider himself gets and Aussie, and giving different benefits for different kinds of kills. While it is true that it's probably easier to get kills with Aussie if you took the Burrow path, and easier to get kills with Fright Rider if you took the spear path, at the end of the day, both paths still have moments where they use Aussie or they use the spear in their attacks. I already mentioned the pole vault attack will have the waves of ostrich heads as part of it, so you can still get kills with Aussie using that. And on the dig path, well, you got things like the improved ground pound and the spin attack on the spines, which are both still going to use the spear. So while certainly, depending on the upgrade path you pick, it's pretty likely that one or the other is going to be harder, it's never going to be that one or the other is going to just be terrible. You see, this is why way back at the beginning I said I kind of like the idea, as strange as it sounds, of making Fright Rider's melee Aussie biting rather than him swinging his spear. Not only because obviously there's a bit more spear attacks than Aussie attacks by default and it helps balance things out a bit, but also because, as I said, the idea was instead of giving him range, I was making him faster, which at first probably seems strange because you look at him and you expect him to be a rangy, pokey character. But hopefully you can see this unique, different vision I kind of had for him, where he has aspects of being able to poke safely, but most of it is more so about, as I say, sneaking behind enemies, getting them from below, throwing them into the air and juggling them around. And for a character like that, I feel like the speed in the melee is a bit more useful. Not to mention, it's not like he doesn't have the range as an option anymore. Not only is his charge still going to have very good range, and some of his combo attacks have really good range, but even his good range combo attacks are going to be more useful because, again, the melees before the combo are faster, and oftentimes you weren't even using those anyway. You just wanted the third hit. So yeah, those are my suggestions for a reworked Fright Rider. I know it was pretty elaborate, but what can I say? I would love to see a lot of Skylanders get more elaborate like this. That being said, let me know what you think about Fright Rider or this rework in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.